Hey YouTube, Awesome Rider here. Welcome to my review for King-ohger episode 24. This was a surprisingly good episode. Not that I thought it was going to be bad or like downright awful or anything, but I was kind of expecting a more quiet, maybe slightly silly episode, which in retrospect is kind of silly itself. King-ohger hasn't had a ton of like filler episodes like that. They've had a few though, but I just figured since we had kind of that big arc with the mecha, then the preview made it look like some more silly fare, literally a silly fare, I thought we were going to be in for more of a down episode, kind of almost like the clip show, where it would be kind of more of a fillery episode that would lead us into things, but not necessarily expect the episode to have this much going on. Like, it was quite a good episode with a lot of stuff I really liked, actually addressing some stuff I've been worried about too. I mean, you do have a little bit of that framework of the silly episode as the kingdoms are experiencing a heat wave and they get together for this festival to sort of take their mind off of it. And you have some funny bits with that. You also have some funny bits of like the kingdoms also yet again trying to get Gira to do stuff for them and take advantage, like, Black Ranger wants to sell all his fruit for a discount, or of course, Rita coming in with their funniest one of they want like a marathon of the Muffin Show or whatever, and so there's some funny bits within it. The main purpose of that plot is actually still more about Gira learning how to be king, as he's initially like quite familiar with his, village friends, which sounds really funny the way I say that, and then his advisor, the guy, the Skull, is like, you shouldn't do that, king aren't supposed to be so formal, you're supposed to be their king, and then he immediately backs off and he's like, I'm the tyrant king, I don't have time for you peasants. And he's trying to figure out like how to act. Like he feels like he wants to act like the normal friend to the people and his friends from the village, and he also wants to act like a king. And then it ultimately comes around to this actually really nice scene with the other king saying, basically all kings are different. There is no one way to do it. That's why we're all different and have different approaches, with my favorite line being Yanma being like, I've done whatever the hell I wanted since I rose up from the slums. Like, so I'm continuing to do that. So it basically gives him the okay to continue to be himself. And like, they also bring up you shouldn't need to do the Tyrant King bit. I can't imagine it'll go away forever. I almost feel like it's a trope in and of itself, like it's like doing away with having changers or morphers, like you have to have the annoying bit. I just can't imagine them not doing that more, but I hope that means moving away from it. Regardless, amongst all of his annoying Toku overacting, I do appreciate that he's had some really nice actual human moments, both with last week's episode when he actually addressed the village about them all being helpful, and then in this episode when he had that nice moment with the whole cast. Not to mention it was a nice moment just for the group together. But the main thing about this episode is actually about the Bugnarok. I've talked about in past videos, almost every video, about how it's been interesting with the series and kind of a breath of fresh air that the villains kind of take a back seat to the human drama, which is kind of rare for Sentai, and for the antagonists being Rackley's and the interplay between all the kingdoms and stuff like that. Like the Bugnarok have had their moments, but a lot has been kind of in the shadows or in the background, with the most focus obviously coming out, I think, when we got Jeremy's backstory. Speaking of, he's now playing a bigger role. Thankfully, I've been worried about this the last few reviews, that I really liked his character and thought he brought a lot of interesting stuff to the table, and then he kind of got shuffled into the background for this Rackley's arc, and I was worried about that happening, both for the potential of his character, and that tends to happen to Six Rangers, but thankfully his arc seems to be front and center again, including him willing to, butt heads with the Rangers, which I think makes things interesting. As much as I like everyone working together, I think it remains interesting if they all still have different perspectives, and I'm glad they kept that, and I'm glad his story about the Bugnarok and human hybrid stuff is front and center yet again. It comes about in an interesting way, as Deathnarok, basically, he wants to destroy everything, like all the other sickos, but basically his motivation is he's pissed that the Bugnarok have been driven underground, for crimes that they don't remember committing or that they didn't commit because it was the old Bugnarok or whatever, and like they're not even sure that it happened. Like, who says it really happened? Which is a really interesting perspective to have, because from the point of view of the story of King-ohger, we've been so focused on the kingdoms and stuff. The general backstory is just kind of a given. Like, yeah, there was a general evil, which is the Bugnarok that attacked, but what if it isn't so simple? Which in and of itself is an interesting question for Sentai, as 9 times out of 10, you'll have interesting characters within it, but the general threat is like, oh, these guys are just an evil group. But the idea that maybe it's more of a gray area is really interesting. And I think it's good to bring up with Jeremy's character, because when he first came about, they were like, oh yeah, my mother fell in love with a human. And I was like, well, that's interesting, like, because he wants to bring them together, but there really hadn't been a ton of instances of the Bugnarok showing gray areas of humanity. There was the one, that was posing as Rackley's assistant girl, and there's been little moments here and there, but just by and large, there wasn't at the time. So this makes things much more plausible and much more interesting, and especially for him, since he wrote down the history, and, his story in general was erased from the history books. As far as the kingdom concerned, there was never a Six Rangers, so it's more than possible, and I'm sure since they're bringing it up, there will be more to the story, and I find that really interesting in general, in terms of Sentai tropes, that maybe the villains weren't all bad, or maybe some of the guys, the King-ohgers in the past were bad. I think that's interesting in general for Sentai, but especially for this story, with Jeremy's story with being a hybrid. He even has a moment where he like helps Gira's kid friend out, and he's like afraid of him because he's a Bugnarok. And I don't know, it was just a really good episode for Jeremy, who also defends Deathrock because he has a very distant, I guess, familial connection to him. He's like, he's my family member, it's my duty to try to stop him. And he's like, will you stop? And he's like, no. And he just eats like the shoe god souls or whatever and jumps into the earth and creates a cliffhanger. That's really funny. It just creates a cliffhanger. That sounds funny. That makes it sound like a nature phenomenon. But you know what I mean. But God, it was just such an interesting episode. I just didn't expect it. Like I said, I expected maybe a lighter episode that would possibly lead us into more interesting stuff, but I didn't expect us to address my worries about Jeremy, you know, having him be more front and center, his story be interesting, bring up new interesting story for the villains, I think setting up this next arc, and also those nice moments with Gira. A 4 out of 5 episode. Again, it really took me by surprise, and I'm really excited for the next arc. Although I feel admittedly equal parts excited and worried. Like, I think this arc is really interesting that we're diving into the Bugnarok, and I'm interested to see where it goes, especially with Jeremy's character front and center with it. But I'm also now nervous because I know we're doing that stupid chair user stuff, and I'm like, I mean, I'm gonna, you know, try to give it the benefit of the doubt. It couldn't end up being awesome. I'm not gonna write it off completely, but just conceptually, I hate that this really unique and awesome season I've been enjoying is gonna get interrupted by one of my least favorite parts of Toku, which is forced crossovers. So I'm a little bit nervous about that, but I'm at least excited for the next arc as it stands. But what did you guys think of the revelations in this week's episode? Let me know in the comments as always. Until next time, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and climb the steps and ring that bell so you get notifications for my videos. Dawson Ryder, signing out.